right. Good morning, everybody. I say morning because I'm where I am. It's 9 a.m. We've got Regis Tremblay in Crimea, Yalta, I believe, and we got Ian Kummer again in Moscow. Carlo and Ben, of course, are here. Carlo's in the heart of DC, and Ben is in Hungary. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We've got a lot to discuss. We've had a busy week. I don't know where we're going to start, so I'm going to kick it over to somebody somewhere who's gonna jump in with an item to discuss. Maybe we'll start with Ben or Regis. I heard you, Regis.
I think Regis can go.
Yeah. Okay, Regis.
Yeah, I think the big story of last week was the BRICS meeting in South Africa and the BRICS declaration. I think that document needs a great deal of exploration. My bubble was burst. I was just loving everything I was hearing about BRICS for the last few years, a multipolar world, respect of the sovereignty of all nations, no matter how large or small, strict observance of the international law and the UN Charter. I mean, I was all over that. Who wasn't? President Putin was all over that. He's been talking about that for the last 2 or 3 years. And so I was really excited. But when I examined that declaration, there were a number of things that jumped out and caused me some concern. Let me just mention 2 or 3, and then we'll see where this goes. First of all, they're talking about a full implementation of the UN Agenda 2030. Already a lot of people have been raising their eyebrows about what that really means. They're talking about public-private partnerships. And that scares the bejesus out of me, because who can trust any of these large private companies that wield so much power? Another thing that they said, they think that the IMF and the World Trade Organization are valuable, but they need to be more fair and inclusive. Crying out loud, the IMF has put more countries into debt and destroyed more economies. They put austerity on everybody under the sun. And so that caused a problem. And then they talked about this digital transformation, a digital economy. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but that's really scary. Eventually, that means no more cash. That means they, whoever they are going to know not only everything about you and what you do, where you shop, what you buy, but it's more than just the economy. It's also healthcare. It's also education. It's also anything you've done to break the law. It all is going to be aggregated into one place, possibly. So that was scary. I was really excited about the idea of the de-dollarization. It looked like, that they've got their new development bank and that they were going to dump the dollar eventually. I thought that was great. But you know what? The one thing that really scared me, the reference to global governments. Global government, one world government. Holy smoke. When I read that, I thought immediately of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. And so I don't know where you guys are at on this, what you think about it, but I think this is a pretty good place to start.
A lot of scary stuff there. I'd like to take a couple of steps backward, because there were a lot of Klaus Schwabian sounding things in there. But first and foremost, what they advocate for is the reforming of the UN to be more egalitarian, as in the developing countries should have a voice, African Union should be a full member of all of that representation. And the banks, they're being, I think, diplomatic to say we need a better alternative to the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and all that. But yeah, I have to agree that there's some worrying stuff in there that we associate with very bad actors. The private partnership is also stakeholder capitalism. If you Google it, it goes straight to the WEF. And China and Russia have played this game over for years. Of course, we're with you on this, we're with you on that. We'll take part in the Davos thing until Russia didn't take part. As you well know, they were booted out of it. But I'm not sure that is a very serious thing. Take the issue of CBD, what do you call it? The central bank digital currencies. China's had one for a while. It depends on the government that implements it. If Biden were to implement a central bank digital currency, I would have all the worries that you have right now, or cackling Kamala, the AI genius,
The AI
very much
genius.
so, but I think the way China or Russia might execute it is a very, very different thing. And the rest of the so-called Johannesburg Declaration was pretty much equal voices, equal respect. Anybody that sanctions us can fuck off and not be part of us. Those parts I liked.
I think Russians just hate taxes too much to ever give up cash. I think that's.
I hope Russia never goes cashless, by the way.
I'm just saying, it's like governing Russians, it's like herding cats. I mean, really, they're not. It's true. So.
I will feel very insecure if I don't have cash in my hand.
Yeah.
And already, here in Russia, I never experienced this when I was back in the States, and that's almost 3.5 years ago now. But they do everything online. They transfer money from one place to another, from one person to another. I mean, they do almost all their banking online. And I got to tell you, I may be a dinosaur, but that scares the living hell out of me. I want cash in my hand.
Yeah, that's what I tell my wife. I'm a dinosaur with you.
It's a little bit generational, because I don't think the younger generation who have been using digital currency is quite as shocked, but it definitely does lend more control to less transparency and more control for the powers that be. So I agree with Ben, though. I mean, there's different kinds of powers. Not all powers are the same. So in the West, I would be worried if Biden was pushing that thing down our throat. But if it's something that China is engaging in, I'm not as concerned. But those are a lot of interesting things that you brought up, Regis. They're very valid points. I had some questions about different ones, like the UN agenda. Did you say 2030 or something?
Yeah,
I've heard of, I've heard some fear mongering about that one. But when you actually read it, it's kind of sensible. It kind of like the plain language that it says is less scary than the fear mongering. But they always will use neutral language to describe whatever. But the bottom line is I have trust and faith in the governments of Russia and China. I know that might sound Pollyannish, but I do. Those are the adults in the room. They understand what's going on. They understand the geopolitical shifts that are taking place. They understand the need to neuter Western imperialism and to lessen the power and hegemony of the West. So, that's what's going on right now. And I don't think that, I think BRICS is a counterweight. BRICS will be a good thing. But yeah, I mean, let's not close our eyes. Let's keep our eyes wide open and watch everything as it unfolds. But those are some great criticisms, you could say. We talked about BRICS last week. The BRICS summit was the big news. Anything else we want to discuss about BRICS? Carlo, do you want to weigh in, or Ben?
No, I have nothing yet to add.
I want to slightly transition to one of, I think, Ian's pet project, which is Belarus, because I, for example, not out of blind trust, like Billy Bob said, but I got the Sputnik vaccine twice. Not to say anything about the pandemic, okay, but that's it, because it was out of a Russian institute, okay? It was the proper medicine meant to save the Russian people. That's the only one I will ever get. Well, okay, I got a Sinovac one once we ran out. Hungary ran out of the Sputnik, but there was a reason for that. And during the oligarch age that Putin put to rest during the early 2000s all the way to the 2020s, Lukashenko in Belarus was ecstatic. and he didn't really trust the Russian system because he was a Soviet man. His country, celebrates the Independence Day not when they became independent of the Soviet Union, but when they were liberated from Nazi Germany. I don't know if you know that. That's Belarus. Classic 70% heavy industry, still state-owned. And once Russia, after the SMO, began looking like that, began more central planning, more family-oriented stuff, really good reform. That's when, and obviously the saving of Lukashenko from the coup. That's where he said, "All right, brother, we're brothers now, all in it forever, and the Poles and the Baltics can fuck off." And that's why he's got nukes, he's got Wagner right now. And I'm just wondering, because these three little midgets and Poland, they had this declaration that they demand that Wagner, this was I think last week, Wagner just be removed from the territory of Belarus. I don't think they know it's not that kind of world that you can demand such a thing. The other news, it was like yesterday that Kim Jong-un is going to Moscow, and immediately the US said, we demand that you just don't negotiate with Moscow. What do they think? They can do this to other nations, to other heads of state? I'm not sure, but yeah, I see the Johannesburg Declaration fully at life. Whoever wants to treat us respectfully, we'll deal with them. Who I think Lavrov said, who wants to deal with us with guns, we got our own guns for that, baby. That's what he said.
Yeah, I'd make one final comment on the BRICS declaration.
Yeah,
I think there were a lot of nice words and thoughts in that. There were some things that were troubling, but that doesn't mean that all of it are going to be implemented. Because I would like to think that a country like Russia might not be in favor of this idea of global governments, for example. Russia is fighting so hard to maintain its independence and its sovereignty. To give that up, I just don't see it. And I think that's very troubling for an awful lot of people, this idea of global government. So the only thing that I can say is, as we go forward and as BRICS moves forward and adds new members, not everything that was stated in that was set in concrete.
Yeah. And do keep in mind that even the BRICS, there was a lot of compromise involved. Just in the expansion, the BRICS 11, the 6 new states, there was a lot of compromise. You have to be between India, South Africa, the interests of Russia and China. It's a difficult balance. But I have a whole lot of hope. Not in global governance. That does not sound good to me at all. But what I see is the outlines of what the UN ought to have been. People having a more equal voice in how to run things, and you need coordination. There's a natural disaster somewhere, you need a coordinating body between multiple countries, multiple resources. I think it's the less scary version, but that's what I. But Ian, I thought maybe you had some commentary on Belarus, but
I have a couple. I do have a couple statements on both, actually. So with BRICS, I think the idea of international cooperation or even some sort of quasi-world government is not an alien concept to Russians. Even after Napoleon was brought down, they had this whole idea of different nations in Europe cooperating under this new order after Napoleon. Not crushing France, not breaking up France, not balkanizing France, but just having this international, balance of power in Europe after. It was mostly. I know the Brits kind of did a goal steal at the end. So we beat Napoleon because we beat him at Waterloo, but it was 80% the Russians who beat Napoleon. This is fact.
They did that with Hitler too,
right? And same thing with the 20th century. So you had the League of Nations, but which Russia was very explicitly not a part of because they had dropped out of the war already with Lenin, and of course Germany had no say in it because they were, they had a boot on their throat at that point. The UN was really, like you said, they had this idea of international cooperation. So when you see this, I don't think this is like completely out of the blue for the Russians, but they are hoping it can be repurposed to what it was actually intended for. No one superior nation over the others. Everybody's kind of cooperating with each other. So that might, same thing with the World Trade Organization. Now for Belarus, it's hard to say. So Putin is a politician. He's a career politician. He's always very careful what he says. Lukashenko, not so much. He's more free-spirited in how he talks. So But I do think it was kind of a two-way decision in how they incorporated Belarus into the
Union state.
Union state. Yes, into the Union state, because the problem was Belarus. I think even Russia was interested in this, was having Belarus play to both sides to an extent. It's a small landlocked country of 9 million people. They really don't want to alienate the rest of the world, because that does hurt Belarus when Poland and the Baltic midget states cut them off. So I think that for the longest time, they were trying to keep Belarus out of Russia's politics and just let them trade with the West and have good relationships with the West as much as possible. But over time, especially at the start of the SMO, that just became impossible. So that's when they really got in bed together, because Belarus had already been sanctioned as much as it could be sanctioned by that point. So there was just, nothing to lose, just, formalizing the relationship even more. So, and that's very true. You can see, I think last time we met, I was telling you about how now you can see a lot more trucks just walking around the street. You see noticeably fewer Western brands and more Belarus brands. Because, that is a good thing about Belarus. They maintained their heavy industry to a much greater extent than even Russia did. Russia and Ukraine lost, in the Baltic states all lost a lot of their industry. Belarus held on to it much better. And so they manufacture trucks, they manufacture farming equipment. It's all good. It doesn't even use GPS. It uses what's that Russian alternative called GLONASS.
GLONASS, yeah.
Yes, GLONASS. And so you see that more in Russia. So they're keeping that economic trade going with Belarus and doing that visa recognition system they're implementing. So if you're a resident of Russia, not even a citizen, you can just hop on a train and go visit Belarus and vice versa. So that you're seeing more formalized relationships. I think it's largely to do because the West has sanctioned them anyways. There's nothing to lose from doing that. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I would just add one comment, and that is we're dealing with nation states here, and the way nation states have come into being, a vast majority have run roughshod over traditional forms of governance that existed prior to that, especially in Africa. So when you're talking about having one world, you're talking about it within the context of the modern nation state, which is essentially a European invention, colonial invention. So I'm no expert, but those dimensions have to be factored in, and I can't really go much beyond that, but I think that has to be a concern when one talks about moving forward with the BRICS or organizations. I think China has the right idea, for example, and not interfering with the internal affairs of the countries they have development agreements with. And if you look at a map of Africa and its development programs, China's development programs there, they have hundreds of development programs. And I was watching a show with some young African commentators who are living in Kenya, and they mentioned the Grand Renaissance Dam, which is something I mentioned too, in Ethiopia, and what a magnificent structure that is. But even in the near term, if you think about what occurred in Ethiopia with the Tigray being thrown out and so on and so forth, it's and the traditional Haile Selassie and going back, it clearly is it clearly involves concerns about the nation state overriding traditional. Some of these cultures go back thousands of years, so there's that element is going to come into play. And I think that what I'm trying to say is globalization is simply not going to be possible under those conditions. The nation state is always going to be subverted by deeper claims people have to their culture and their religion and other aspects of their existence, which go back, like I said, centuries. Just wanted to drop that.
I wanted
Fair
to
point.
jump in real quick. So thinking about it and thinking about what Regis was saying, a lot of people are a little bit, I think there's been a real broad and powerful indoctrination against the idea of a one world government. That's been like a boogeyman, and it's been financed by billionaires. It's been financed by U.S. Money and Western money that want to kind of denigrate the UN and give the empire a free hand. And the whole propaganda was designed to turn people against the idea of the UN and against these international bodies, to enable, the imperialists to act with impunity. So they're not constrained by these international norms. So that indoctrination is still with people. And then when they hear things like, the one world government language from this BRICS document, it triggers them. And I think that's what's going on here. And again, I think it's better to perceive this one world government language in the following way. It's like we currently have a world governing order, and we're going to improve it and make it better, and we're going to make it more equal, and we're going to give less power to the West, and we're going to enfranchise all the other countries around the world. And I think that's a better way to understand the one world government that they're talking about. I don't think they're going to they're really not talking about putting up one central government that's going to dictate to everybody what to do. And that government's going to be in Beijing or Brussels or DC. I mean, I don't think that's realistic, but I think that's what some people gets triggered in their mind from their past indoctrination. Regis, I cut you off before I started that rant.
On that very point, can I quickly just add, I think you're going through something I went through maybe 5 or 6 years ago, because at that time someone said Europe should be like a federated state, like the United States of Europe, something like that. And I, at that time, as naive as I was, I thought that was a great idea. That was before I studied the structure of the EU, the structure of the UN, with all the lofty rhetoric. Yeah, it's basically ruled by US veto, ruled by US dominated institutions, not what it was supposed to be. And I think both China and Russia see that exactly as clear as day. That maybe there was this potential at one point, but it's completely, I mean, just to say this in my lifetime, that I think the foreign minister of Iran just challenged the US's rights to be on the UN Human Rights Council because of their record. And yeah, that's the beginning of the Johannesburg Declaration, of trying to reform something that has been working against us. And yeah, I don't see like building an artificial island somewhere and there's going to be 250 countries represented there. It's what I see is there's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a Chinese-led thing, the ASEAN, there's also BRICS, there's also the Belt and Road Initiative. These have been going on in parallel across the Eurasian continent, all the way to South America, Africa, and these sort of incorporating into a structure where people countries can solve border disputes, settle diplomacy, get win-win cooperation, benefit to you, benefit to me. That's what I see it as, not some Klaus Schwab is at the top and you will eat the bugs, because I think that's the antithesis to the multipolar, the multilateral BRICS that is envisaged here.
Yeah, for me, when I look and study that Johannesburg BRICS Declaration, there's two things that are contradictory, really. This idea of a global government or global government, and all those statements about respecting the sovereignty and the independence and the culture and the language of all countries, large and small. And so I don't know if this is a tension, but there's a lack of definition definitely about some of these terms. And I would like to put my money, if I had any, on the idea of returning to the original intent of the United Nations, the original United Nations Charter, the strict observance of international law, and then the respect and sovereignty of all nation states, all countries. I want to add one more thing. Carlo, I'm going to go back to what you were saying. A lot of these countries go back thousands of years. And I've recently been in Armenia on 2 occasions.
I was going to ask you about that.
There's an enormous conflict going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, an independent country. They declared their independence. There's been 2 wars fought over this between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The people in Nagorno-Karabakh want to be independent. They and the people in Armenia want to preserve their culture, their history, and their language, which goes back hundreds, maybe thousands of years. It's the same thing in Georgia
Right next
with
door.
Abkhazia. And you know where this goes back to, and I think this comes into play. Borders have been redrawn over the centuries because of one empire after another, one war after another come in, and power brokers decided where the boundaries would be. And many times those boundaries did not respect culture, language, and religion. And I think this has been a problem in many parts of the world. It's been a problem in Kosovo, and
Yugoslavia,
in Serbia,
Hungary, I was going to say.
Yugoslavia, Hungary. And so I really hope that when the BRICS movement continues to evolve, that a lot of these, what I consider foundational principles, will really begin to take hold. And I think what is happening, Ben, you mentioned it with the SCO, ASEAN, the Belt and Road Initiative, and now BRICS document. I think what is happening, and is very clear, that the United States is being isolated, or I will put it a different way, has isolated itself
Yes.
from the majority of the rest of the world.
Completely agree. Completely agree. One of the latest news was because you know that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are not going to attend the G20 summit, which is coming up in September in New Delhi, India. It's not a snub to India, by the way. They've made very careful attempts to say that. It's just because they don't want to meet Biden. They don't want to deal with that guy. It really
Absolutely.
is just that simple. And what's amazing to me is I think the EU governments recently stated somewhere that they are going to take advantage of this vacuum and show that they mean business with Africa. They want to engage with Africa. Well, good luck with that, Europe, for 1,000 years. You know, I think Africa remembers well. That's why they have all the Russian flags. And the other piece of news was amazing to me. I mean, you've probably heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia just recently also committed to another reduction in oil production by, I think, 1 million barrels per day or something like that, 300,000 each, something like that. It's hit the oil prices. There's been a big spike today. And they, meaning the UK, the EU, and the US jointly said they want to threaten, they want to warn not Saudi Arabia, but the Emirates, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, against further dealings with Russia. I mean, it's just these self-isolated idiots still thinks they can dictate stuff to people outside the little crust, the little perimeter of Western Europe, North America. Well, Canada's in there, and maybe Australia. I don't know who else is in the club anymore, but it is a splendid self-isolation, as you put it. I couldn't agree more with that. It is.
Yeah. I just, as a sidelight, Citgo is under the tutelage of the United States. Gave Citgo to Juan Guaido and Carlos Vecchio, and they bankrupted it. They basically looted it, and it's going on to the auction block soon. I can't remember the date. I think it's sometime this month, and so companies that have claims against the Venezuelan government are set to bid on Citgo and buy it for pennies on the dollar. It's that kind of out and out piracy, just robbery, just felonies. You know what they lock people up for $20, stealing $20 out of a cash register at a convenience store. These people are stealing billions of dollars, and so it's an amazing example. What triggered it in my head was
Africa.
the fact that every time Saudi Arabia and Russia get together, and they cut oil production, Venezuela smiles, because Venezuela still has access to oil revenues, and the price of oil goes up. So they can initiate more of these projects they have to help the people and directly help the people. And but the U.S.'s way of going about this thievery is so disgusting, and so right out in the open. I just can't imagine how they get away with it, stealing the $1.3 billion in Venezuelan gold and all of that. So
yeah, it was just quickly, we can move on to anything, but I wanted to add, but don't forget that the Arab world, the OPEC world, was supremely pissed off a year ago today when the price cap, the Russian price cap was, it's dead now. Basically, no one talks about it in MSM because people are just buying above it. It doesn't matter. But we have one power here. We are OPEC. We can set the prices, and the US and the EU think they can set the prices. They were pissed off with them. And you're right when you talk about, but just thievery and piracy. I mean, small piece of news. We don't have to go too deep into Africa, but the revolutionary government, the temporary government in Niger, has basically rose the price of raw uranium, which we all know French pretty much lived and powered their country off the very, very cheap uranium there. It went from 80 euro cents, 80 cents, so less than a euro, to 200 euros, which is per kilogram, which is the standard price you get from Australia. That's not going to go well, I don't think, in France, which is why we had a very irate, shouting Macron, a scary thing, saying these countries wouldn't exist without France, and we are not going to let them go. And yeah, that's what's been happening under the radar. Nobody talked about it, but bleeding them, robbing them dry, and it's coming to an end. And
perhaps France won't exist as it does now. There's a little payback.
Who was that? Jacques Chirac, I think. Without Africa, France would be a third world country.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd like to just underscore the abominable and deplorable behavior of France in Mali, stealing all of Mali's gold, and in Niger, stealing all of the Nigerian uranium, right? Uranium. So can you imagine? It's like they were getting it for 89 cents a kilogram, whereas when Australia sells theirs, it's like $200 a kilogram or 200 euros.
Euros, yeah.
I mean, and how long? Nobody knew about. I didn't know about that. How long has that been going on for? It's just disgusting, and it's something that probably the Africans are more well aware of, and that's why, again, we see the Russian flags, and we see these coups. Really, they're getting sick of it, and I think the Russian SMO again is largely responsible for people decided to take a stand, and I think it's great. So we see this snowballing effect of anti-imperialism and anti-Western sentiment that has been a long time coming, and it's built up, and it's great. I wanted to let our viewers know we are responsible hosts, and that's why we asked Carlo to wear the caution tape on his head. Mm-hmm. He has some ideas that are very dangerous. So viewers, just keep that in mind when he says anything.
Well, one of the dangerous ideas is, I've heard many commentators say this, and it's just common sense. If you go around stealing $360 billion of Russian dollar reserves, just stealing it, or all these other thefts that have gone on with piracy by the United States, people aren't going to trust you to hold their reserves. They're going to want their reserves in some other currency or some other way of trading. So what the United States is doing is, like I wrote on my Twitter page, they're not shooting themselves in the foot, they're shooting themselves in the head. And I think it's a really
Olaf Scholz.
Unbelievably stupid. Yes. Oh, yeah. Burrell, it's a garden. Europe is a garden.
Jesus, I think that's left a mark on his bio forever. Just that one little rant about the garden.
Yeah, really.
God. One of the things that I have observed and experienced firsthand in the last few months, and with my travels to both Armenia and Abkhazia, and my relationship with some people in Serbia and Austria who have been talking about the soft power of the United States in their countries. And I'm sure you're all aware of the Peace Corps. Well, they're going to come in and they're going to win the people over, and we're going to teach you how to do things. And then when they're in there, USAID comes in, and there's money. Oh, we're going to give you this money to do things. And then George Soros, Open Society, comes in and does their work to turn the people against their governments. And other NGOs who come in and try to change the understanding of the people in these countries. It's pervasive. The United States has employed this in every single country where they have an embassy, that's for sure. And the other thing, when I was in Armenia this last time, I didn't notice it the first time. We kept driving by this enormous building up on a hill. And I said, "What is that building?" And they said, "It's the United States University of Armenia."
Mhm.
It is governed not by the Armenians, it is governed by the United States. The professors and the curriculum are all determined by the United States. Now, when that hit me, I thought, my God, we must have thousands of Armenian students who have gone through that university and have been indoctrinated, propagandized at an early age with all of these Western United States values. It is insidious what the United States has been doing around the world.
Absolutely.
And I can only hope that the empire, the hegemon, is isolating itself for one, but I hope collapsing on its own.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Can I add a little bit, because I feel it's my responsibility as a Hungarian? George Soros, it's not because he's a Jewish man, it's because he's an enemy declared of China and of Russia. And you can now understand why there was a lot of cheering in Budapest when we uprooted the Central European University attached to his foundation. He's gone from here. And that is why, Regis, I will tell you again, that it's not just he's a little hot-headed, he's become my spirit animal, because when there was this interview of Lukashenko with this fucking BBC piece of shit journalist. It was his phrase that we will eviscerate your NGOs, we will get rid of them, we will destroy them. And he did exactly that. He cleaned that house. No USA, no of these NGOs left, none of that. Basically regime change schooling systems left in the country. And I think the whole world needs a lot more of that.
I want to.
Oh, so go ahead. No,
Oh yeah, I was going to say about Armenia real quick, because I've been there too. I've been there twice, and I'll say yes, it's crazy how much. Well, I mean, considering how small Armenia is, and how much money the USA spends, and it's amazing. And you know, I bet there's a lot of money we spend there that's not even openly spent there. You know, I think we spend more than we say, because you go there because, like you said, there's a university, there's USA, you know, everywhere. It's very funny. We went, I cannot remember for the life of me, remember this library. You probably know what I'm talking about, Regis. There's this library that's built in the Soviet era. It's got all these old scrolls and texts. And it right in the middle of it, there is this foolish woman from, I'm not even kidding, there's this foolish woman from the US State Department in an office in the middle of this Soviet, which I just think I would not, I don't know how she does that, because I would, if I was her, I would not be able to take myself seriously. You know, I'm here to say America's better in this building that was not built by us. That was built by someone. Is that there's America's good, you know, in this Soviet building. It's very common. We also, interesting fact, it's one of the largest embassies in the world. Armenia.
Oh, they have a fortress. I studied the Kiev one. It's like Fort Bragg. It's an enormous complex.
It's a CIA complex. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah. And when we talk about Soros, we have to remember where Open Society comes from. It comes from a book by Karl Popper, who was a philosopher of science, called Open Society and Its Enemies. And it's a lot of propaganda. But he also came up with in the philosophy of science, he came up with the falsification theory, which is the notion that really where science progresses, and this is a money a money game. Where science progresses is when experimentation takes place, there's a certain tautology, and you get the answers you want by the information you put in, and that's philosophers like Feyerabend and 1,000 other philosophers. I've been preaching this for years. Have pointed that out, that all science just progresses like the Higgs boson. Science only progresses to a point and then there's all this material, this extraneous material that does not conform to the intention of the experiment, and that is what Popper calls the falsification theory, and he claims that that's the part that has to be investigated. In other words, that's where you have to put more money in, keep it coming and then you get another experiment, and it has another 20% of data which doesn't conform to your what you thought was going to occur. You got to put more money into that and into that. So I mean, one of the things I was hoping we'd get to on the show was with S.L. Canton. Is that the Indian fellow's name?
Friend of the show, Canton, yes.
Yeah, artificial intelligence. Because what's really interesting to me is, first of all, let me point out that Sir Isaac Newton predicted when the end of the world would occur by Christian numerology, and actually some Jewish numerology too. What year do you think Sir Isaac Newton predicted the end of the world?
1800.
2060. 2060. He's the guy, along with Leibniz, that accelerated philosophy and mathematics to the point where you got neocolonialism because of the rapid advances in technology in Europe at the time. That's where the age of discovery comes from. And so that's a very critical point. It's not a point I'm making like I am some sort of genius. It's in all the textbooks. It's important. How can you say that the calculus is not important? So you got that aspect. So when you come to artificial intelligence, and this kind of plays into the notion of a global currency, for example, and everything being on computers. This Tesseract group, which is a group of billionaires in Silicon Valley, the conclusion they have come to, because they want to terraform the moon, they want to terraform Mars, they want to terraform the solar system and beyond, is that you can't do it with the human beings in the form that they're in right now, like you guys.
Oh, you're going.
I'm an alien.
Transhumanist trend. That's where you're going.
But they say all humanity has to be reduced to algorithms in a computer. The human consciousness has to become an algorithm in a computer, because that can be immortal. That can be treated with as a human species carrying on throughout the universe. That's how crazy and radical these wealthy people were up against. Think, this is insane. So they have eugenics programs, and they have genocide programs, and the whole notion is that you have to look forward to when human beings are no longer in their bodily form and can be treated as immortal, and we can simply ignore the kind of concerns that China and the Belt and Road Initiative are addressing in human form. I know it sounds crazy, but that's why we ought to do a show on this. The Tesseract people, they control Silicon Valley. They control billions, trillions of dollars, and that's where they're moving.
We should, and that's why he wears the hat.
What's that?
And that's why he wears the hat. Yeah,
because I'm thinking outside the box. And
look,
anyway,
you have to read what's the second in command of Klaus Schwab, Yuval Harari. I know his name is Harari. Just read the like, without irony, he writes this stuff, and he really is one of these loony out there people. I agree, but I don't want to. What do you guys think? Do you want to jump in here?
No, there's probably nothing to add right now. But
well, you mentioned transhumanism. in this artificial intelligence and
Yeah.
the rest of their agenda, to put that very simply, it's all about dehumanizing us. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
They're all about denying everything about our humanity. And I feel that is a terrible danger. I think it's an evil agenda.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd like to jump in and give my 2 cents. I mean, so that's one way of describing it, dehumanizing us. But I see them as trying to disenfranchise us politically and
Yeah.
economically, right? They want all the power. So, and that's the class struggle. That's what Karl Marx talked about in 1865, or throughout his career. But the class struggle, and essentially, the wealthy elites have interests, economic and political interests, that are different from the interests of the vast majority. And the vast majority represent a threat to their obscene disproportion of wealth, power, and privilege. So they're looking for ways to divide us, to disenfranchise us, to keep us at each other's throats, and keep us from threatening what a real good system they've got going. So they've got a really good system where everything is determined by capital, and they have all the capital. And so they don't want to change. They have no interest in changing, but change is being forced upon them by certain governments around the planet. And so there's a response to that. So it's, Ben, please.
Okay, let me just sort of tie that up in a knot and bring it back to the concrete, because the AI, we're sounding very dark and sort of conspiratorial here, but yeah, there are people who think like this. Harari is a prime example, very, very strange. And it's been forced on them by their own tools. It's automation, digitalization. It's basically their rate of profit is approaching zero. We've known this for 200 years. So their solution, which they cope in degrowth and Agenda 2030, is lower the population, then there'll be less useless eaters. But look on the other side of the globe, which is just recent news. I'll bring you 2 or 3 pieces of news where AI and high IT technology has been employed for the betterment of all. Huawei, basically for 2 years, there's been a chip war on Huawei. The state, it's not state-owned, the state is in tandem with a completely employee-owned corporation, which is Huawei, to destroy it. We will never have 7-nanometer chips. And the moment Gina Raimondo landed in Beijing, they released the Mate Pro 600 something with locally made 7-nanometer Kirin chips. And now Bloomberg and Business Insider, not the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal have picked apart the phone and say, shit, they innovated. They got around the sanctions. This was never supposed to happen. I thought they were 10 to 15 years behind the technology, and they did it without us, for fuck's sake. 2 other pieces of news. After the COMAC, the C-19, which China calls its domestically created airline, passenger airline plane. Last week, Regis, you might have seen the Sukhoi Superjet 100 do its maiden voyage. That is actually 100%, what do you call it? They call it import substituted, which is every single little element. I mean, this is Russia. They took people to space in the Soviet Union. Of course they can make an airplane, but they did it so bloody fast. It is the point. So already that means that Boeing and Airbus, the 2 monopolies in Europe and America, they're no longer monopolies. You can underprice them. You can introduce competition on both ends. The chip war. I mean, fucking hell. Joe Biden was at this signage of Pure American, and he was opening a Siemens plant in Arizona, a German company who fled the high energy prices because he blew up a fucking pipeline. And he says Pure America. He attracted a shitty German company to his shores while he lost the chip war, which I thought was amazing. So it depends on how you use these technologies. I mean, in China, what you see is these people who are engineers who employ AI to do absolutely optimal lines, what do you call them, assembly lines, to create the newest NEVs. They go out and do exercise in the park, maybe a little kung fu, then watch the latest movies, and they get freer time. Their life improves. It is the opposite of what's going on in Western Europe and America. So again, I'd just like to differentiate. Yes, the capitalists are in a bind because the rate of profit approaching zero, because humans create all the value and the machines are just cheapening and cheapening and cheapening all that. But it depends on how you look at the perspective. What's your outlook on the 10 years, the 50 years that China, and increasingly, I think, Russia, has its eye on.
I would like to add.
Who I did two more things, and then you go, because one of them was opening a massive cloud data center in either Saudi Arabia or the Emirates. I'm not sure. I have to check, but I don't want to. And the second one was they're releasing the Harmony Open OS for desktops for PCs, and that would challenge Microsoft. So that just happened in the span of a week. You go.
Well, I was going to say the issue, I think, with AI in general principle, not even picking on any one particular country or group. I remember this was a humorous story. This is probably from about a year ago. There was this paleontology conference. So paleontologists having this online at some, I don't remember which platform, it doesn't matter. They had this platform for their big video conference, and the built-in anti-obscenity filters were blocking everything. Like, it was obstructing the conversation. Like, you could not say the word bone because, of course, it's a euphemism for something. So imagine paleontologists not being able to use the word bone. So I bring that up because what that does, and it's the same thing with Facebook and Twitter and all these other big platforms that people were able to live without, but now become dependent on because they are better than what we had before they existed. You get people become used to conforming to rules that were not even put in place by a human mind. Because if a human mind is controlling it, at least you can tell that human mind, hey, you're making a mistake. Of course, an AI or an algorithm is impervious to being told it's being made. So it gets people very used to complying with rules that do not make sense and are irrational. Which is worse than fascism, which is worse than any right-wing or left-wing government, because at least however bad a government is, it's trying to be rational, and AI is not. So
it's that and I want to go back to what one of our viewers, Paulie, said about Kissinger wanting to live to 150. There's a man named Aubrey de Grey who actually has made that his life's work. That he claims that he's going to live to be 160 because as technology progresses, he will be able to take advantage of all these medical procedures that will allow him to live longer. But I want to back up what Regis said about the inhumanity of it. There's a I don't know if you guys are familiar with Frederick Winslow Taylor, but he wrote a book called Scientific Management, and his bit was to go to major corporations, and this includes Ford, and he would map out efficiency, how human beings could do their jobs more efficiently. It's just infamous now in the workplace. But one of his experiments.
Ford gave birth to the assembly line, right? The mass assembly line. That's Ford.
Yeah. But he would do things like they'd have these piggets, these heavy piggets of lead, and they had these workers load them on, and he would be there with his stopwatch, and if you couldn't load like 9 piggets in a minute, you were fired. So that's how inhumane that was. I mean, and Ian he just touched upon what I talked about a couple of weeks ago. It's not so much that robots are becoming like men. That's strong AI. That's what they call it, as opposed to weak AI. It's that men are becoming like robots, and that was when I came across Scientific Management, the crudeness of it, the inhumanity of it, just struck me, and at core, at capitalism at its core. But that's a kind of a crude example. So one funny story about Taylor, he was visiting one of these corporations that had initiated his Scientific Management, and he insisted to the management there that he be allowed to go down on the shop floor and talk to the rank and file. And they said, no, you can't go down to the killing floor, because if you go down there, they've said that they were going to kill you. The workers were going to kill you. And so he had to back off. And that's humanity. That's what we're up against with all of these things. Not only from U.S. foreign policy right down to Silicon Valley's tendency to dehumanize mankind for its own self-aggrandizement and enrichment. So anyway,
I love the kind of Orwellian name they paste on it as lipstick on a pig, because they're called the Amazon fulfillment centers, where much the same takes place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fulfillment centers. That's
Ben, you've got a few images I could throw up on the screen. This first one looks like a map of Ukraine.
I wanted to congratulate Ukraine, and basically Regis is in. He'd know better that this is 3 months on the 4th of this month of a counteroffensive, and all the advancement you see are in the blue. That's 3 months of dying. About 60,000 people dead, according to Shoigu's latest. And I really love the fact that, well, this guy we can talk about later, but I wanted to also show this because these were 2 articles, one from yesterday, Forbes, same guy, David X, and the one from today, because it went viral this morning that Russia destroyed the first big Challenger 2. It's supposed to be invisible. It's supposed to be a sniper rifle that can shoot at the Ruskies from untold distances, and it's out. You know, Bay Systems, which is the UK government's thing, they wanted to set up a Ukrainian UK shop in West Ukraine to build these things. I don't think the PR is going to look very good after this at all, because this is the 11th Wunderwaffe that's gone up in flames. I mean, Putin. There was this recent joint. He had a talks, 3-hour talks with Sultan Erdogan. Regis could probably chime in on that, and it didn't look like a very, on the part of Erdogan, a very successful meeting at all. But that's where he said it's not just it's, I don't know how he said it, but it's an absolute failure. The counteroffensive. This thing is ending in front of our eyes, and I wanted to say congratulations on that. And this thing just came out because he had some sort of a running accident, and let the memes begin, because he came out with that eye patch today in his official X, formerly Twitter thing, saying, that looks like the German economy 2023. Let the memes begin. Yeah. I prepared a couple of those slides, but I couldn't put them together in a cohesive manner.
He looks like the stereotypical German villain in like a computer
like a James
game.
Bondian.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Bond.
Hello, Mr. Bond. It's
yes.
Like, yes.
And
the problem with those Challenger tanks, so I mean, it's been in the news for weeks that they were there's speculation that they were really trying, because it's been known that the Challenger is, has issues and it's not terribly survivable. So they were really trying to keep them on the back burner and out of harm's way. So if they are committing, because there was a lot of speculation that Challengers would be the last asset they would throw in. So if they're
this David X guy, he talked about the 82nd something regiment, which was the big NATO supplied, very powerful NATO trained thing that has 16 of these. That's it, 16. You probably know that Ukraine had 2,000 tanks at the beginning of this. 16 is not going to change anything. Like that attack last week at the Pskov airfield, which was very strange, very far from Ukraine, but it took out 2 Ilyushin 76 cargo airplanes. Well, Russia in 2020 they had 116 of these. So I don't understand. They do these little pinpricks things. They're changing the guard. Reznikov is out, and they're trying to recruit the people who fled. I don't know the legality of this, but apparently Poland is going to send back those deserters. I thought you could only extradite a person if they committed a crime, but anyway, this is the end game. It really looks like it's unraveling at a rapid pace. I didn't want to shift subjects too bigly, but I did want to get your thoughts on this, Regis, because you're closer, and Ian.
How do you sleep knowing that Crimea will soon be occupied by Ukraine?
Yeah.
Oh, it's already.
It was supposed to be a summer party, wasn't it?
Summer, yes. They were. It was everybody. Ben Hodges, Zelensky. Everybody said they would vacation in Crimea in the
They're
summer.
registering DJs for the summer party. Yes, I remember that.
Sorry, Regis. Go ahead.
No. Here's my take on what's going on. People are saying that what is occurring right now in Ukraine is a stalemate.
Oh.
That is bullshit. Russia has gone as far as it needs to right now. It is a war of attrition, not on the Russian side, not in terms of men or ammunition, but it's a war of attrition in terms of men. the numbers people are talking about now of dead exceed 400 and maybe 50,000, and maybe as many wounded, not able to return to the battle. As Scott Ritter has said, the end is not going to be determined by the calendar, but by the results that Russia is achieving and will continue to achieve, which is all three of their goals: demilitarize, denazify, and ensure a neutral Ukraine. Now, the other part of this equation, the way I look at it, I've been critical at times, and I think wrongly so, of President Putin and the people in their Ministry of Defense. I've been critical because they seem to have continued to allow the Donetsk, the city of Donetsk in the region, to be shelled every single day. The numbers who have died in this 9-year war exceed 20,000 innocent civilians. And I've said, why is Russia allowing this? The other side will say, well, they're really dug in. You know, they're hiding behind civilians, schools, hospitals, etc. But then I know all of you have noticed this just in the last month to 6 weeks to 2 months. The attacks of Ukraine by drones and missiles deep into Russian territory. And Crimea is Russian territory, my friends. We have undergone so many drone attacks, aerial and sea-based, in the last couple of months. Putin has said if Russia is attacked, he will respond with everything they have in their arsenal, nuclear.
That includes the Sarmat now, yes.
And here is the way I'm starting to look at this now. Putin and the people around him have showed unbelievable patience.
Oh, yeah.
In absorbing these attacks that have taken lives, 2 attacks that have destroyed a section of the bridge. It's still not repaired. Attacks that destroyed those airplanes that Ben was talking about.
Skov.
Attacks on the business center in the center of Moscow. Why have they not responded? The only thing that I can figure out, understand, is that they are not taking the bait. Because taking the bait would mean a rapid escalation to nuclear war.
Yeah.
Now, I will say one more thing. I think you will remember Muhammad Ali and George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire, when Ali employed what they call the rope-a-dope. He went for an entire 15-round bout, just letting George Foreman pound him and pound him and pound him until George Foreman was exhausted. And then Ali moved in for the kill and won the fight. I think,
watched Garland Nixon too. So well said.
I think that Russia is employing the rope-a-dope.
Yeah. Jesus, I had something to say, but that Ali took me away from the place. That was.
I was going to say, well, what I'd add to that is that it's not a good sign for Ukraine because it's like Regis said, these are provocations that in of themselves have little to no military value, but unless they provoke a mistake, a response from the enemy. So, but when you think about it, they are costly because these are drones, these are assets, this is time and bandwidth that's being spent on ineffective attacks, smashing some windows here and there. You know, this is effort that could have been put towards more drone attacks on actually military militarily useful targets at the front in the direction that they're attacking, and they're not. So that's, I think, a bad sign. And I think we're also going to see a shift from conventional warfare, from these conventional offensives, to more terrorism, because they're simply going to just lose the means to even wage conventional warfare, and going to have to switch to unconventional warfare.
Yeah, and
Putin mentioned that Ukraine retains an offensive capability. He said that the counteroffensive has been a failure, as everybody can see, but that Ukraine still retains some offensive capability, and he wanted to leave it at that. But that's a great map. That map of Ukraine. I mean, you can see exactly what they've accomplished with scores of thousands of deaths and not a lot to show for it. But yeah, I mean, it continues, and they're, the talk is, they're gonna mobilize another 300,000
women, children, 17-year-olds, disabled. It's horrifying. Yeah.
So it's unconscionable. I mean, the West, of course, is supporting that and maybe dictating that to them. Who knows? How those conversations go behind the scenes. But it's horrific, and it's awful that they're just willing to waste human life, and it's not to benefit Ukraine. That's for fucking sure. So
the goal is to destroy and depopulate Ukraine as much as possible, because because I think that's understood by at least some people.
I think you mean by the West now.
Right, because they leave Russia not with the functioning Ukraine, because Ukraine is part of Russia. It's historically always been part of Russia. Let's be honest here. They don't want to leave it with a functioning Ukraine. They want a depopulated and burned out husk. They want, everything they can squeeze out of it to be squeezed before it's given to Russia. Depopulated, destroyed, contaminated with uranium, maybe set off some nuclear reactors. Anything they can get away with, they will do.
Which is horrific. Whereas they are in a real bite, and I can't blame them now. I think Kuleba, the one with the big face and big head and the small face, I think that's Kuleba. It looks a bit like Charlie Kirk. He said that all of the guys criticizing our pace, shut the fuck up and come fight it yourself. Yeah, I understand, because he's been promised a quick victory and all that, and he isn't getting it. But they are trying in their desperation to rope in NATO. They don't understand. NATO is a paper tiger that was never going to rush in. They had this thing 2 days ago with Romania. I mean, Russia's taken out all the port cities. One is on the border with the Danube River and Romania. And they said, oh, look, it fell. One of the missiles fell in Romania. Romania immediately said, no, it didn't, you crazy idiots. Immediately. But they tried this with Poland earlier. And they just, come on, somebody come in or else this is over. And yeah, I think they feel the rope. But what remains to be seen is what desperation brings out of such a regime. And that's...
one of the things that I would like to add, and we talk about all of these drone attacks and missiles that have been fired deep into Russia. Putin and Lavrov have both been saying these are terrorist tactics.
Yeah.
And they're designed for public relations purposes and to terrorize the people.
Well, that's not working, I think.
Well, that's about what I'm about to tell you. Living here in Crimea, they haven't even come close to Yalta, where I live. But I have been to Sevastopol, that has come under numerous attacks, aerial and marine. They've all been disabled, shot down, destroyed, whatever, as well as several of these landing parties coming in with speedboats. I have to tell you, life goes on as it always has. People are not even talking about it. 2 weeks ago, I was at an amazing concert. It was a ballet, 3-hour ballet about war and peace. 3 hours, just as long as the book, and a 15-minute intermission. One would have thought, you know what? Maybe they would have canceled this because it's within striking distance of Ukraine, and what a PR kill that would have been for Ukraine to shoot a missile on that. Nobody was concerned. There was no security. There were no checkpoints, nothing. And so the idea that terrorism is supposed to frighten and terrify the local population, I have to tell you, it's just not happening. What it has had an effect, and I will tell you this because in want to be transparent, the attacks on the bridge have cut tourism this summer to Ukraine. I don't want to know a percentage, but I want to tell you, living here in Yalta during the summer, this place is packed. There are traffic jams all day long. Cars from across the bridge. The beaches now, I mean, they're almost deserted. If you go down there at night, and we do at night, we go down to swim at night after the most of, the activity is over. It used to be crowded with foreigners, with Russians, filling up all the establishments. We go down there now, and there's only 100 maybe. There's hardly. We were talking about how badly some of these businesses are being hurt because there's nobody to buy this stuff. And so it has had that negative effect on Crimea and in terms of tourism, and it has affected restaurants, hotels, and shops. But other than that, this tactic has failed miserably.
Yeah, those people who thought they have this big legendary, well, I'd call it a psyop, but falsification of history that when Hitler attacked, then Stalin was crying under a table or something like that. They don't understand Russians. They don't understand Russians. The moment Russians are attacked, I think they just solidify and they think of their grandfathers and all that. And this just...
I couldn't agree more. It's in their DNA.
That's also why I think Scott Ritter writing that book, Seeking a Russian Soul, I think he's working on that. That's something that needs to be written right now.
Yeah,
I'll say there was definitely, just from going off of what I saw and my Russian friends and just everybody, there was I mean, of course, it'd be completely reasonable. There was hysteria, there was panic, there was a lot of people upset at the beginning. Especially because everybody, myself included, kind of believes, okay, there's not going to be a war, and if there is a war, it's going to be like a police action because no one on either side really wants to fight. It's going to be over like in a couple weeks. There's not going to be not even hundreds of casualties. It's going to be like a brawl, and then that's going to be it. That's what pretty much everybody. People were very surprised, and so I think when it sunk in that this was going to be a long, drawn-out, bloody conflict, a lot of people were very upset and hysterical. Some opposed the war, some opposed Putin, some were just upset in general. But I think after a while, that became the new norm, and everybody calms down. And so this idea that they were going to collapse Russia was never going to happen. And that initial knee-jerk panic at the beginning, which also could have backfired and caused a nuclear war if the wrong person had panicked or panicked the wrong way. We came very close to Armageddon then, but I think now that everybody's calmed down, it's just a new norm and they're in for the long haul. And this opportunity that certain Western oligarchs were hoping for has passed. That window of opportunity is closed for them.
I think I was guilty once, and Regis corrected me very quickly, of calling it a stalemate. What I meant by stalemate, of course, on the ground, like, the actual give and take of the territory is, you could call that a stalemate. But when you look at attrition rates, it's definitely not a stalemate. Like, it's a definite, large victory for Russia in the fact that so many more Ukrainians seem to be dying rather than Russians. So, and economically wise, it's not a stalemate. On the battlefield, it's not a stalemate. One could make the point that just the actual movement of the borders has been a relative stalemate for a little while. But that's not the criteria that we use to decide who's winning. So I agree with Regis that it's definitely not a stalemate, and it's a foregone conclusion. I mean, you look at the numbers. Ukraine never had a chance. They still don't have a chance. And it's a great commentary by Ian, I thought, about what the West wants. The West does not give a fuck about Ukraine. The West is happy to, turn Ukraine into a husk, to have hundreds of thousands, not 500,000 Ukrainians die. That doesn't bother them at all. That's good for them. It's less,
less Russians.
And I can't believe
depopulation. and it's gonna create a lasting enmity. You know, there's gonna be families in Ukraine that are gonna forever be unhappy with Russia. Wrong people to be unhappy about, by the way. Families in Ukraine that lost people, you know, be unhappy with Zelensky. But yeah, you know, these are not any kinds of cause for concern for the West. They're all pluses from the perspective of the West, and that needs to be underscored.
Unfortunately, as I said last time, a lot of scorned and angry Banderites are not just going to be in Ukraine. They're going to be all over Europe, and that's going to have some long-term bad effects, really bad effects.
Well,
unequivocally lost.
We just saw some of those guys. Where was it? In Florida. They were
Florida,
just in Florida. That one guy, McCullum or whatever his name is, he's got all the tattoos on his face. He's been flying, you know, back and forth to Ukraine. He's definitely a proxy that, you know, the West utilizes and protects. You know, he's a protected asset. Are you guys familiar with what I'm talking about?
But yes. They're called the blood, not bloodhounds, blood pack, something like that. And red wearing massive bling bling swastika wearing shits. And they said, what about Ukraine? Oh, vote for Biden. He sends missiles, Slava Ukrainian.
Vote for Biden, yeah.
Vote for Biden, which was just
Nazis
amazing.
for Biden. That needs to be his big 2024 election slogan.
Yeah, you know, people are talking about the end game, and I'll tell you what I think the end game is for Russia. Oh, you won't hear Russia really say this, but it's the total capitulation and defeat of NATO and the United States of America. Total capitulation. People are talking about, oh, there's this peace plan and this peace plan. There is not going to be any peace plan. This is going to be just like the surrender of Japan on the Missouri in Tokyo Bay to MacArthur. Sign the paper. There's no talk about peace. There's no talk about compromise. Russia will dictate the terms going forward.
I agree. And I couldn't be happier, especially when it comes to the EU and the NATO part and all of this.
Now, the question will be, is that under Biden, a Biden government, or a Democratic government, or is that under a Trump government?
Well, can they stretch it out until the elections? What
do you guys think?
Well, I wanted to shift the discussion if I could. May I do that?
Regis, sorry to interrupt. Ian's kind of running out of time, but if you
throw me under the bus.
Sorry, but
you're good.
We just talked about the Biden administration or the Trump administration or somebody else. You know that there were people here in Russia who follow the news from the United States, and they are aware of a couple of things. Number one, they know there's an election coming up. They know that Trump seems to be more pro-Russian than anybody else. He's promised to end this war in Ukraine within the first 24 hours of being elected. The other part of it is they are talking about Joseph Biden's crime family. Of course, people here have known what Joe Biden has been doing in Ukraine when he was vice president. It led up to the coup, publicly threatening the prosecutor who was investigating Hunter and Joe. And he bragged that you're not going to get the $1 billion that we promised if you don't fire the son of a bitch. Now,
he bragged about
to me, he bragged about it. It was public. It's all over YouTube. And if that was not enough to impeach the guy for this kind of meddling in another country's affairs, I mean, what is? And now you've got the Hunter Biden laptop that has revealed names and numbers and deals and the cut that the big guy's been getting. And the thing that people here are really finding really interesting, they're wondering if there's any democracy left in the United States, and they're wondering if there's any justice. And
Carlo is answering on behalf of all of us.
Yeah, and the FBI covered it all up in the last election, 2020. They did not let that come out. You talk about meddling You talk about meddling. What they accuse Russia of is proved to be a hoax, but there's no better example of meddling in an election than the FBI did in the 2020 election that
And then
stole.
the DOJ was weaponized. Yeah, pretty much.
You said it. They've weaponized the justice system in the United States, and people here are talking about it. But I want to ask all of you, and Ben, I don't know how much you're aware of what's going on in the United States, but what is the tone? What is the mood? Is the general public even focusing on this now? Because I know that the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Financial Times, and others are beginning to report this. So what the hell is going on in the United States with these revelations and with Joe Biden's criminality?
I will answer it from a European perspective. After you guys, let's have the three Americans first.
Billy Bob.
I'm going to be very, very surprised if they allow Trump to run. I think they're going to utilize the lawfare. They're going to convict him, and they're going to keep him from getting on the ballot somehow. So I don't think he's going to be a viable candidate because, again, he represents too big of a threat, and the stakes are too high to allow a loose like that in office. So I would be very, very surprised if he was allowed to run. And then if they do that, they're certainly not going to let him win. And I think they have mechanisms for keeping him from winning. And you know what? I mean, it's possible that he could run and lose legitimately. I mean, that's a possibility too. But I don't think the U.S. is just sick to death of the ruling establishment. And I think Trump's denunciation of the swamp resonates with a lot of people. But then they've countered that with a whole bunch of anti-Trump what's that word? Trump derangement syndrome. They've infected a lot of people with Trump derangement syndrome. So he's very polarizing. People like the fact that he speaks out against the swamp, but then they hate Trump because he's Trump. So
Trump being Trump, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Ian, do you have anything better to add than that? I don't know what else to say about that.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I would consider the possibility that might not have an election at all. They had that weird hysteria over the past couple of weeks about COVID, and I don't know if they're actually seriously going to bring back lockdowns, as opposed to just make it public to see how people react to it. But I think there's that idea of justifying a lockdown, and I think wartime powers would be a great way to introduce a
Tucker.
lockdown.
I was going to say
that's what Tucker say. You say, because a hot war with Russia, trying to have a limited, doesn't need to be a full. They might have this idea if we have a hot war, even a minor one with Russia, that will legitimize another lockdown that's just like COVID. Maybe they'll even make you wear masks.
Yeah.
So you're not infected by Russian bioweapons if you wear a mask.
I ain't wearing a mask. Let me give you the European perspective before I give you mine and the Hungarian one. Okay, the European perspective, two pieces. One I read in Politico, and that was about the sort of Western European leaders. These kind of Baerbocks, these Habecks. By the way, Baerbock just stood next to the Romanian prime minister and said, "You import from the cocaine fields of Ukraine," and she didn't correct herself. It was the beautiful Freudian slip. Anyway, these people were terrified of Trump because Trump already said he'd defund NATO, and they would be left with this can of worms in their hands, a defunct country, negative GDP, everything has to be reconstructed. They'd be left with the problem thrown under the bus. On the other hand, the Economist, that is very neoliberal, very much pro-America. It's the finance capital layer in London, the city of London, very much aligned with the US. They said there are problems with Biden. Even the Democrats find him unpalatable now. I think they use these nice words, unpalatable. So they're between a rock and a fucking hard place. Whereas Hungary, as you see on the continent, we are different. Because our leader said, yeah, we prefer Trump. He looks to be the sane when it comes to foreign policy. And I said this before, I'll say it again. What he almost did in unifying the Korean Peninsula was amazing. And he should have done more if he wasn't undermined by different people. I'm not a go-hard Trumper, but seriously, Biden is a threat to humanity at this point. So would I prefer Trump over this? Just for the value of saying the quiet part out loud? Yeah, I would. That's my perspective.
What would happen though if they physically, really, viscerally prevented Trump from running.
I
I
can't
mean,
say. You guys can.
Yeah,
Civil War? I don't know.
I don't know. What do you think, Billy Bob?
I don't. I think people will take it. I mean, we take everything. We don't. We just take it. I think. There are going to be a lot of unhappy people. There's going to be some talk, but nothing. I don't see any kind of insurgency or civil war. Not at all.
I think you're
I'm
right.
hesitant. I'm hesitant to say this, and I
Regis,
hope that.
can I quickly add a question before you say that? Will he be the
Yeah.
first sort of jail-in, mail-in president since Eugene Debs? Would he be that?
I'm sorry. What?
You running for president from jail? Like I think the last president was Eugene Debs who did
Debs,
that.
yeah.
Would he be the...
He's no Eugene Debs, though.
No, he isn't.
I don't know. I think he could probably win, even from behind bars.
Wow.
What's
Yeah,
your
What
two
I
cents?
wanted, what I wanted to say was, one of my children spent 14 years as a Green Beret, medically discharged, full disability because he had
Back problems.
back problem, 2 vertebrae replaced. He's fine now, but he had told me, he said, there's a lot of us in the military and a lot of guys in the Green Beret that felt sold out with the rapid retreat from Afghanistan. My son was there. He lost friends. He said, morale is really low. Guys are angry. And he said, Green Beret guys are getting out before full retirement because they can't stand the scene.
Mm.
But that isn't what troubled me the most. One of his specialties was he was a sniper. And he has a lot of, let's say, military weapons and hardware. He told me a couple of months ago, Dad, I'm stocking up on ammunition, food, water, and fuel because I think it's going to get ugly. And I think that it's going to be a shooting conflict, civil war that will take place in the United States. Now, as all of us probably know, there are a number of groups who for many years who have been preparing for this in places like Idaho, in other remote places around the United States, preparing for a war against the government that they believe is illegal. Now, this really kind of shocked me when my son told me that. God forbid that he's listening to this show. He wouldn't like me telling this. But if he's not just one, I think he's one of many who believe that the government is not representing them, that the government and their top brass have been disloyal to them. Okay? And they're angry. And I think they look to Trump to clean the swamp, the antithesis of the Democrats and Biden and constant war. And I think he's expressing the feeling of a lot of Americans, whether they're armed like he is or not, of a tremendous anger that exists in the United States today. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but this comes from a family member.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, I want to back up what Billy Bob said, and I don't think I think the inaction is probably going to happen because it's a little bit like the toad in the pot, and the pot's being slowly heated. For Trump to run for president, he has to make the ballot in each state separately, and there's all kinds of thousands of different rules in this. So it's not unlikely that he'll be denied several states, and if you're not in that state, that'll of course you don't have any commitment to that state. Americans don't have any commitment to any goddamn thing. They're a bunch of blowhard ninnies, as far as I can tell. And what Regis is talking about, yeah, everybody's upset. People in my neighborhood are upset, and they're basically, basically minorities. But they're upset from a completely different place than the people that Regis is talking about, who form the right wing. Uh, they've been disappointed. They voted for Obama. He didn't do shit for them. They're not stupid. They saw that, and so they're disgusted too. Everyone's disgusted. Now, as far as the Civil War goes, people around here just they don't own guns. I mean, you might have a guy that's knocking over convenience stores, and yeah, he has a 38, but there's not a lot of guns around here, and so they're not thinking in those terms. They're not happy, but they're not thinking of rising up. Well, because they got good examples. I mean, let's face it. Look what happened to the Black Panthers. I mean, the minute the Panthers started to walk around with guns, suddenly Ronald Reagan was for gun control. My God, talk about the level of hypocrisy. And if you want to think of anybody that's been in power, in the presidential power, in recent memory, Reagan is the closest to Trump. Now, Reagan had much more Machiavellian advisors, and he listened to them because he was basically, he had a pea for a brain. In fact, I had a guy call me up one day when I was doing a cable access television show to tell me he had been in a hospital in Indiana in the 1950s, and they brought Reagan in for brain treatment at that time, and that's right before he began working for the major corporations he worked for that backed him for governor and presidency. That big money. That's another factor. Big money. Trump has big money behind him. Reagan had big money behind him. These people that we're talking about going off and taking on the government, they don't have big money behind them. I mean, I think the big money, Mercers and the Teals and the Kochs, they don't want that. They don't want to see that. They'll start financing the U.S., the National Guard, the U.S. military, and every kind of official for law enforcement agent in the country, an agency in the country to put these fuckers down. And they will. They'll crush them. They'll fucking crush them like they've done the American Indian movement. And, to take on the rhetoric of the left like the right has done now, it's futile. It's the power internally that the U.S. can bring to bear on anybody that gets out of line is extraordinary. And the only way it can happen is if certain elements in the institutions that exist, like the FBI, and to a certain extent the Central Intelligence Agency, though they're openly hostile to the right-wing people, and they're turning them in right and left, but is to get some people on their side. And I really don't see a whole lot of that going on. I think the institutions in the United States, the law enforcement institutions, see what side their bread is buttered on. If you're you're a cop, you have a police force of 5 people in your small town, and the fucking military has just given you a Humvee and a troop carrier, and the U.S. government has outfitted a SWAT team so you can go in and arrest every poor white fentanyl user in your jurisdiction. You're beholden to them. They're basically putting money in your pocket. They're allowing you to live like a king in the shithole town that you get elected every 4 years as sheriff or police chief of. So it's not going to happen. And if it does, they're dead. I will sit back and I will laugh at the stupidity of that.
It's non-existent, but you could see an increase of extremism and individual acts of rebellion. But as far as like a legitimate civil war where you have a large, powerful, organized group going to war with the establishment. I mean, I don't see that either. I agree with everything Carlos said, honestly.
Maybe we could wind it down at
Well, let me
this
just say one other
topic.
thing.
But can I please interject?
Yeah.
Because I'm not
Okay.
going to represent any American. I don't have an American bone in me. I'm far removed by history and by physical thought. But the international news, especially from the financial classes, looks like, you know, the USD, the greenback, is losing its influence on oil markets. And if that decouples, I mean, we have twice the prices here in Europe as you have in the US. But everything, looking at the inflation, what is it? The strategic reserves of oil that Biden released to keep the fuel prices down, that can't just be replenished. You are having a crash coming to you, the likes of which you have never seen. That is what I'll say to that. And then it's your guess is good as mine as to what will happen. But
Well,
please continue. You have your own perspective.
I know one thing that will happen because it's already happening. Price of oil goes up, the Jews did it. Price of oil goes up, the African Americans and the immigrants did it. These people on the right always pick the weakest people in society to go after. And they're going after them now. They've already done it. They're already in that. I mean, in a way, they're savvy. They know if they go after the real power, they'll get creamed. But so they go after people they perceive the scapegoats, the weak people. They go after them. I mean, I grew up among these people. I heard them talk. Mooly, niggers, you know, kikes. That's all my family said. You know, my extended family.
I think
That's what everybody. That's what every
less.
male in my neighborhood said.
There's less and less of that, and not more and more of that. It still exists, but it's diminishing. It's not increasing.
But there's still it's. But if you look at the statistics, there's a lot of violence being done.
There was a lot of skinhead Nazis in Hungary who dared to speak up before Ukraine. Now they're quiet as fuck because they know there's consequences.
I have to agree. I have to agree with Ben. I think the United States is going to experience in the entire West an economic collapse like you've never seen. I think they are going to go through something like the Soviet Union went through when it collapsed.
1990s.
When you look at this unsustainable and rising national debt, when you look at what's happening from my perspective now in the United States, as Carlo is saying, people have turned against each other. They've been turned against each other. You look at this issue, this huge problem of immigration coming in from Mexico and Central America. When you look at this controversy over sexuality and sexual rights or privilege or whatever you want to call it, I think the United States has also lost its moral compass. I think it's lost its care for the poor and the impoverished. They've done away with the
Never had it.
And they've pretty much done away with the social safety net. The infrastructure,
Never had
the infrastructure is going to hell.
I can tell you, I've never had a social safety net. You know, my father he told me, he used to say, keep the dogs out of your dish. And what he meant by that is nobody here is going to help you. Maybe if there's a flood or something for a few days, there's this kind of thing going on, but it doesn't go on. One thing I want to say about immigration, it's U.S. foreign policy. It's the fucking right wingers, the very ones that are unhappy with the government now, that got behind the reason all these immigrants are coming up here because of Reagan's war, and they were behind Ronald Reagan, believe me, on Central America. God damn it! That's what's causing the whole problem of immigration.
Same for Europe and Africa.
With Reagan, it really intensified. He fucking murdered hundreds of thousands of people in Central America. He made El Salvador a place for gangs to fester and fester. This guy, I have my son-in-law.
Of course, Carlo. I'm not sure.
You're right.
My son-in-law has a construction business, and he has a bunch of Salvadoran kids working for him. And they asked me about Bukele, and I'm torn. Bukele has ended the gangs in El Salvador because he's arrested tens of thousands of them because they're stupid enough to have MS-13 tattooed on their foreheads so you can easily identify them. And he's put them in prison for life. No trial. Fuck you. 66,000 seat prison in El Salvador. You're done, buddy. You're never going to see the light of day. You're going to die in here. And that's what Bukele has done. That's harsh business. And a lot of innocent people, of course, are being locked up. But by the same token, these kids, they're for it because back home, their families can walk the streets now. Their families can have a small business and not be extorted. They don't get dragged out into the bush and killed for not paying the VIG.
Okay, Carlo.
So anyway, that's so. You got
point
this
made.
right
I
wing.
think.
I want to just point out how stupid the right wing is because they're the ones that back the very policy that brought the immigrants here, and they can't think it through.
The same happened in Europe. And
it took you a while to get there, but yes,
range of
I
perspectives.
agree. Would you disagree with that?
Historic one.
Immigration is a result of imperialism
Carlo.
and the destitution
Carlo.
of the countries south of our
Americans
border.
are stupid. They're the
Carlo.
most.
I would like us to
stupid
wind
planet.
down, people.
Oh my God!
Let's listen
You
to
don't
Regis.
have to live here. Oh,
Carlo.
shit.
I'm worried about your blood pressure, my friend.
No, that's all right. My doctor worries too. Fuck him.
Yeah, keep wearing the hat. We have a broad range of perspectives, including historic ones. Carla is right about everything. The same happened in Europe when we bombed Africa, and now we have a migrant problem. But, these things interact. I wanted to bring us back to present and concluding thoughts. I don't know what you think about that, but what Regis said about the budget, not the budget, the borrowing the US has embarked on. It's going from 1 trillion to 2 trillion in a single year. I mean, Joe Biden just asked Congress for a short-term little money just to avoid a fucking shutdown. That burn is coming. It's coming faster than anybody expected. So I wish I had anything positive to say. What happens there? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm worried, but I'm too far away, guys. But
Well,
concluding thoughts.
A concluding thought. I'm now 78 years young. I'm fortunate to be in good health with no known illnesses. You get the aches and pains that come with growing old. I have tried to focus most of my attention, apart from tonight, on sucking every last drop of what's good in humanity. What's good that this planet has provided us. We're talking about very dark things, very dark times. We're talking about maybe the unthinkable happening. But I think it's really important to focus on the good and the positive that life has to offer all of us. I have so many friends who are depressed, so many friends who are angry. And I say, go into your garden, go to the woods, go to some kind of classical music event if you can. Because really the beauty that I think human nature has created is in the form of the arts, literature, music, theater, all of the arts. You see, really, I think, the wonderful, magical, mysterious things that humanity has to offer us. I'll end on that note.
All I could say is amen to Reverend Tremblay's.
Yeah, let me
wonderful.
let me support Regis in that. There's an American poet, William Carlos Williams. He was a pediatrician too, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but it appears in a long poem he wrote to his wife called "Asphodel, That Greeny Flower," and he goes, "It's difficult to get the news from poems, but men die miserably for lack of what can be found there." And I always thought that was a pretty profound statement from a guy I really don't admire that much. That was nice.
Good sermon, gentlemen. Good sermon. Ian and Billy Bob.
Hey, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for being back.
I kind of like this format. Really, it's kind of free for all, and there's no time limit. I'm always happy to see Billy, Bob, Carlo, and Ben. And Ian, happy to make your acquaintance. We'll have to maybe do something on the side just to talk and get to know each other.
I think that'd be great. Yeah, Billy Bob, if you want to send him my email or vice versa, yeah,
Sure.
we can definitely
Make it
follow up after this. I think that'd be great.
By the way, Regis, the same for you. You drop some unexpected bombs on us, and it's always fascinating to get into those discussions. Really, really good.
Yeah, good to see you too.
I would
Very
say my
nice.
2 cents. I'd say my 2 cents here. Closing thoughts would be, and again, it's a great discussion. Free for all, it's always something new. But I'd say as far as what's going to happen with the USA, I would point out what was going on in the Soviet Union. You had that in those early votes. The majority of people wanted to keep the Soviet Union. They did not want it to dissolve. It was done forcibly, and they had that manufacturing of consent after the decision had already been made. Like they always talk about, like in Ukraine, they always talk about that second vote where 80, 90% voted yes, but they never mentioned the earlier vote where the majority said no. And what really happens, if you look at like the minority groups, the non-ethnic Russians pretty consistently voted overwhelming majorities to keep the Soviet Union because they understood these little landlocked countries need a larger union to flourish. It was the ethnic Russians who were the most disillusioned, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons it stopped working is because that majority of people had become disillusioned with it. And it's the same thing in the USA. It's our majority ethnic groups. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants are the ones who are more disillusioned. So my theoretical crystal ball, you'll have minority groups like Carlo, you were talking about. Well, those minority groups will realize, hey, look, anarchy won't help our impoverished communities. It'll make things worse, not better. It'll be us white folks who are like, you know what, fuck the union. Who cares if it dissolves? And that's what's going to hurt everybody is us, the majority, throwing in the towel, which is essentially what happened in the Soviet Union. That's my closing thought for you guys.
Great thoughts. Shout out to Paulie, Blue Eyes, and I just forgot the third guy, but thank you for bearing with us.
Wanderer. For Spinato. I wanted to just conclude. I was looking for a way to talk about China's overcoming this high-tech embargo of their economy with their new phone. We did mention it earlier. I wanted to underscore that. There's just no stopping China. The Western Empire has a very, very difficult job on their hands to deal with this, and there's nothing they can do. They've got no tools in the toolbox to contain China. It's just not going to happen, and so it's just great to see when it actually fails. A lot of reason for optimism. I'm very optimistic. I appreciate everyone coming on. And this was a good discussion. We're going to do it again. I'm going to give Regis and Ian, I'm going to share your guys' contact info. But thank you so much for watching. We had quite a few live viewers, and we always appreciate that. So we're going to be back on Thursday for our Thursday edition. We'll be back next Tuesday, of course. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next time.